In 2017, a seasoned solo hiker on the remote slopes of the Sierra Nevada vanished without leaving so much as a boot print behind. Rangers proposed a simple explanation: he must have slipped, fallen, and been claimed by the wilderness. But no broken gear, no clothing, not even a torn scrap of fabric was ever found to support that theory. For 7 silent years, the mountain held its secrets, untouched and unmoved. Then, searchers squeezing through a narrow, wind-carved crevice discovered something wedged deep inside the rock, something that should not have been there, and something that raised a far darker question about how he really disappeared. The wind along the high ridge carried a strange, whistling note that morning, the kind that makes even an experienced hiker pause and look over his shoulder. But he didn't. He kept walking, boots pressing into pale granite dust, his orange jacket flashing against the endless blue. To anyone watching, he would have looked like a man simply disappearing into the sky. No rush, no hesitation, and no hint that this would be the final verified moment of his life. His name was Daniel Rourke, a 44-year-old computer engineer who treated the wilderness the way other people treated meditation. He wasn't reckless or thrill-seeking. He was methodical, patient, and almost painfully prepared. His sister Mara once joked, "Danny carries enough gear for an entire search team, and that's for a day hike." Daniel only smiled. "It's not the mountain you plan for," he told her. "It's the 10 seconds you didn't plan for." The Sierra Nevada was his cathedral. Its ridgelines, carved by ice and lightning, were where he felt most alive and where he felt most himself. Friends described him as quiet but deeply attentive, the type of person who noticed the color of moss, the shift in clouds, or the way water sounded beneath snow. They believed nothing in those mountains could surprise him. They were wrong. 2 days before he vanished, Daniel sat at his usual cafe in Bishop with a folded topo map and a neat list of waypoints scribbled on a yellow pad. The barista asked, "Heading out again?" "Yeah," he said, tracing a thin line up a ridge. "Quick overnight. Nothing fancy." "You ever get scared up there alone?" Daniel shook his head. "Not of the mountains. People maybe. But not the mountains." His planned route wasn't extreme: a remote off-trail basin, a ridge traverse, and a descent toward a glacial tarn. Rugged, yes. Dangerous, definitely. But Daniel had done far harder climbs. He texted his sister his itinerary and expected return time. He double-checked weather patterns. He packed spare batteries, emergency beacons, a metal bottle, 2 knives, layered clothing, and enough food for double the trip. When he left the trailhead that morning, a ranger named Cole Patterson watched him sign in. "Solo?" Cole asked. "Always," Daniel said. "Storm window looks narrow. You planning to camp above the pass?" "If conditions hold." Cole eyed the ridge. "They won't hold long." Daniel gave a small, reassuring smile, the kind that implied he'd already accounted for that possibility. Then he adjusted his pack, cinched the straps, and started climbing. He moved fast, almost too fast for a man carrying that much gear. Reports later estimated he reached the halfway point just after noon. Cole, doing a patrol sweep along a lower route, spotted a tiny blot of orange ascending the high ridge. He recognized the jacket instantly. It was unmistakable. "He's making good time," Cole murmured to himself. He lifted his radio, hesitated, then lowered it. There was nothing unusual to report. He didn't know that this fleeting glimpse, a flash of orange against jagged stone, would become the final confirmed sighting of Daniel Rourke. Beyond that ridge, the terrain sharpened abruptly. Narrow ledges, sudden drops, hidden crevices where wind screamed through like a warning. Up there, clouds could roll in within minutes, swallowing the landscape into a cold, colorless void. But that afternoon, the sky was brilliantly clear. There were no signs of distress, no frantic signals, no equipment scattered along the path. Daniel walked over the ridge and simply vanished. He didn't return that night. Or the next. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, the ridgeline had been scoured clean by 2 nights of brutal wind, as if erasing the trail of a man the mountain no longer wished to give back. And yet, even in those first hours, one detail would stick in the minds of those who knew the Sierra. Daniel wasn't the kind of man who just disappeared. If something had taken him, it happened fast. If something had trapped him, it was somewhere no one would think to look. The mountain, silent as stone, had already chosen to keep its secret. The first sign that something was wrong came quietly, a soft chime from Mara Rourke's phone, a missed check-in. Nothing alarming at first. Daniel sometimes returned late, if he found a good view, or a patch of untouched snow he wanted to photograph. But as the minutes stretched into hours, a tightening dread crept into her stomach. Daniel was many things: introverted, stubborn, obsessively prepared, but he was never careless about time. Not in the mountains. By nightfall, she had called the Inyo County Ranger Station twice. The second call carried a tremor in her voice. "He said he'd be out today. He always checks in. Something's wrong." Ranger Cole Patterson remembered the orange jacket instantly. "We'll send someone at first light," he promised, though the knot forming in his chest suggested that sunrise was already too far away. At dawn, the mountain looked deceptively gentle, soft pink light brushing the granite peaks, thin mist rolling across the basins. But Cole knew better. He gathered a search team, briefed them on Daniel's route, and hiked hard toward the base of the ridge, where he'd last seen him. "Should find prints along the approach," one of the SAR techs, Lucia, said, scanning the ground. Cole frowned. Even with wind, there should be something. But there was nothing. No boot impressions, no bent shrubs, no transfer of mud. The trail looked untouched, as if no one had walked it in days. Still, they pressed upward, expecting any moment to find a broken trekking pole, a dropped glove, a scrap of fabric caught on granite, the tiny breadcrumbs most wilderness disappearances leave behind. They found none. As the team crossed the lower ridge, Lucia paused. "It's like he teleported," she muttered. Cole didn't respond. He had been thinking the same thing but refused to say it aloud. Not yet. They traced Daniel's intended path across the ridge, fanning out to cover every chute and bowl where a slip might send a person tumbling. The Sierra does not show mercy in its high reaches. A single misstep can send a body hundreds of feet. But even in such cases, debris tells the story. Fractured plastic, torn straps, gouges in stone. Here, though, the rock was pristine. By midday, the radio chatter grew unnervingly quiet. No one had found so much as a thread. "Check the talus field below the saddle," Cole ordered finally. If he fell, he might have ended up there. The team scrambled down the steep slope, loose stones clattering under their boots. At the bottom, the silence felt heavier. Hot sun pressed against the granite, and a thin wind hissed across the rocks like dry breath. This was the place where the mountain usually gave clues. It gave none. "Nothing," Lucia called. "No pack tears, no impact marks, nothing at all." Cole wiped sweat from his forehead. "That doesn't make sense. Even a controlled slide would have—" A sharp sound cut through the air. A faint, distant echo like a single voice, calling out. The entire team froze. "Did you hear that?" someone whispered. Cole lifted his head. The sound had come from the granite bowl beyond the saddle, a deep, amphitheater-like depression, where echoes could travel for miles. Still, there was something about the tone, the sharpness, the upward lilt at the end. It had sounded human. "Daniel," he shouted. His voice echoed back, warped and stretched, but nothing answered. The team climbed into the bowl, sweeping every shadowed crevice, every cluster of boulders. The air cooled sharply within the rocky depression, and the echoing made navigation disorienting. "Could have been our own voices bouncing around," Lucia said, but unease threaded through her tone. Hour after hour, they searched. Hunger gnawed, throats dried. And still, the mountain gave them no footprints, no gear, no trace of injury or struggle. By evening, Mara arrived at the ranger station, her face pale, hands trembling. "Did you find him?" she asked, before Cole even stepped inside. Cole removed his hat slowly. "We found nothing. Not yet." The way her expression collapsed told him that nothing was far worse than any injury could have been. Because people suffer injuries. People get lost. But people do not vanish without leaving a single mark on the earth. And deep in the echoing silence of the granite bowl, Cole could not shake the feeling that the faint cry they'd heard was not Daniel calling for help, but something else calling back. The third morning began with a bruised purple sky, the kind that warns rescuers they have only a few hours before the weather turns. But Cole Patterson was already awake before dawn, sitting on the tailgate of his truck, staring at the ridge where Daniel had last been seen. He hadn't slept, not really. Every time he closed his eyes, he kept hearing that faint, impossible shout echoing across the granite bowl. At briefing, the search team looked worn down, sunburnt, dehydrated, muscles stiff from endless scrambling. Yet there was something else in their faces now, a quiet stubbornness. Lucia tightened the straps on her pack. "We're not going home until we find something," she said. Cole nodded. "Today we widen the perimeter. The mountain is hiding him. That means he's somewhere we haven't looked." If the Sierra Nevada had a personality, it was secrecy. Caves, sealed by ice for years, gullies that swallowed entire boulders, drop-offs invisible until you stood on them. The terrain shifted with storms, with melt, with time. A person could fall into a space that simply didn't exist the previous season. But even then, they usually left something behind. The team moved in a slow, methodical line along the ridge, probing every crack wide enough to swallow a boot, every shadowed slot between stacked granite slabs. Cole paused at a vertical fissure about 3 feet wide. "Check inside," he said. One of the climbers slid in, light sweeping across the dark stone. After a minute, he called out, "Just dust and spiderwebs, no trace." They kept searching. At noon, thunder rumbled far off just enough to make the team uneasy. They retreated to a sheltered alcove beneath a rock overhang, the kind carved by centuries of wind. As they ate, Lucia glanced at Cole. "You think the voice was him?" Cole hesitated. "I don't know. It didn't sound right. It was too clear." "Echo? Maybe." But neither of them believed that. After the break, they scouted the north face of the ridge, a treacherous maze of narrow ledges and hidden chutes. Cole had always hated this area. It reminded him of a broken staircase spiraling downward into shadows. "Rope up," he instructed. They descended slowly, boots grinding into tiny footholds. A rock clattered loose beneath one rescuer, tumbling out of sight with a hollow, unsettling whunk, like it landed somewhere enclosed. Cole felt his pulse spike. "Hold up. That wasn't open ground." Lucia leaned over the edge, listening. Another faint thunk. "Feels like a void under there," she murmured. They repeated the descent, probing the rock, but found no access point, no opening large enough for a grown man. It was as if an entire chamber existed beneath the ridge, but couldn't be reached. A place shaped for echoes. A place where a shout might sound almost human. The discovery unsettled the team deeply. By afternoon, temperatures dropped sharply. Clouds thickened overhead, bruised and green around the edges, storm-breeding colors. The wind picked up, scraping grit across their faces. "We should head down," Lucia said reluctantly. But Cole stood still, staring at the mountain as if waiting for it to blink. "No," he whispered. "Not yet." He felt responsible. He had seen Daniel alive. He had let him walk into the mountains, knowing the storm window was thin. And now Daniel existed as a ghost trail, a man who left no imprint on the land. They pushed onward for one final sweep before the storm hit. Fat pellets of grapple began clattering against helmets and jackets. Visibility shrank. Radios hissed with static. "5 more minutes," Cole shouted over the wind. The team fanned out, reluctant, exhausted, driven by something approaching obsession. They combed boulders, scanned cliffs, rechecked the talus. Nothing. Not a broken strap. Not a torn thread. Not a single story mark left by a man who should have fought to survive. At last, with lightning cracking across the distant ridge, Cole made the call. Everyone down, now. As they retreated, the storm swallowed the mountain in a roaring white curtain. The sound of wind echoed eerily through the granite valleys, repeating and warping the team's voices as if someone or something were calling from somewhere beneath the stone. Back at the station that night, soaked and defeated, Cole filled out the daily report. Under the final section, Findings. He stared at the blank line for a long time before writing just one word. Nothing. It was the first time in his career that the mountain had returned absolutely no trace. And yet, deep in his gut, he knew they hadn't reached the place where Daniel's story ended, only the place where it had disappeared. When the search was suspended the next morning due to weather, Cole walked out alone to the base of the ridge, looked up into the mist, and whispered, "I'm not done, not with you." But the mountain, unmoved, offered only silence. For most people, 7 years is a measure of progress, new jobs, new relationships, seasons that come and go without ceremony. But for the Rourke family, 7 years became a suspended breath, held too long. Time didn't move forward, it circled the same unanswerable question. Where did Daniel go? The official search had ended long ago, replaced first by small volunteer efforts, then by the occasional lone hiker who claimed they were just going to look around. But the mountains kept their stubborn silence. No gear surfaced during spring melts. No bones washed out during storms. Trails were hiked, campsites checked, old snowfields thawed and refroze, all without revealing so much as a whisper of Daniel's presence. For Mara, each passing year felt like a strange mixture of grief and betrayal. He didn't run away, she told investigators during the third review of the cold case. He wouldn't do that. He loved those mountains. The lead detective nodded sympathetically, but offered nothing new. Some disappearances, he said gently. Stay disappearances. But statements like that didn't settle the ache. They only deepened it. Meanwhile, Ranger Cole Patterson continued to revisit the ridge every summer. Not officially his reports were done, his duty long fulfilled, but something in him couldn't let go. He'd climb the same kettle-shaped bowl where they'd heard the strange echo. He'd stand on the ledge where Daniel was last seen. He'd kneel beside the fissures they once probed, with headlamps and ropes. Every time, the mountain showed him the same expressionless face. "It's impossible," he muttered once, brushing dust from his palms. "People don't just disappear. Even the missing leave something." The Sierra Nevada disagreed. Year 5 brought an intense winter that buried entire ridgelines beneath 30 feet of snow. Year 6 brought sudden summer floods that ripped away small boulders and reshaped creek channels. If Daniel had been trapped in a shallow location, the mountain should have loosened its grip by then. But nothing surfaced. Not until year 7. A drought settled across the region that summer, the kind that shrank alpine lakes into pale ovals and melted snowpacks months ahead of schedule. It also exposed routes that were normally sealed by ice, opening the mountains like a book with pages suddenly peeled back. That was when a volunteer mapping team, working with a conservation group, ventured off-trail into rarely documented terrain. Their task was simple: update erosion data along an isolated chute system north of the ridge where Daniel had vanished. No one expected to find anything related to the case, not after all this time. Yet as they squeezed through a narrow part of the chute, one of the volunteers paused. "Hold up," she said, shining her headlamp into a deep shadow. "What's that?" The crack in the rock was impossibly tight, barely wide enough for an arm, but something inside glinted dully under the cold light. "Metal, maybe. Or stone polished unnaturally smooth." Another volunteer crouched beside her. "Could be runoff debris." "Runoff doesn't wedge things inward like that," she replied. They radioed Cole, who happened to be on duty nearby. As soon as he heard the words metal object and deep crevice, he felt his pulse thunder against his ribs. "I'm coming up," he said. The climb took him over an hour, sweat stinging his eyes despite the thin air. When he reached the team, they stepped aside to give him space. Cole knelt, pressing his face close to the narrow crevice. Inside, buried in darkness, something unmistakably man-made was trapped in the stone. Sunlight couldn't reach it, but the headlamps revealed its contours bent, dull, and coated in dust. His breath caught. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." He reached in, fingertips brushing cold metal. But the object was wedged too deep to pull free without tools. "What do you think it is?" one of the volunteers asked quietly. Cole sat back on his heels, face pale. "I think," he said slowly, "the mountain finally gave us a piece of Daniel." But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake a deeper, colder thought. The air inside the narrow chute felt colder than the rest of the mountain, as if the stone itself still remembered whatever had been trapped within it for 7 long years. Cole kneeled again at the crevice, this time with tools: a small chisel, a handpick, and a thin pry bar meant for delicate extraction. The volunteers stood back, their faces tense, and the wind swept steadily through the chute, carrying a low, hollow moan that made every strike of metal against rock echo like a heartbeat. Carefully, Cole widened the opening by inches, chipping away flakes of granite until the space allowed him to reach deeper. The headlamps illuminated the object again, a dull curve of metal bent sharply, crushed inward as if by enormous pressure. "All right," he breathed. "Let's try again." He slipped his arm inside, stretching until his shoulder pressed painfully against the stone. His fingers hooked around the object. He pulled. For a moment, it didn't budge then. With a groaning scrape, the mountain reluctantly loosened its grip. Cole fell backward onto the gravel, the object landing beside him with a clatter. The volunteers gasped. It was a metal water bottle dented nearly flat, scraped along one side, its once bright coating stripped down to bare aluminum, and engraved faintly along the crushed surface, nearly erased by time and pressure, were 2 initials: D.R. Mara had mentioned he always carried that bottle. The same bottle he'd used on every major hike. The same one she'd given him for his 40th birthday. For a long moment, no one spoke. Lucia, who had hiked up after hearing the radio call, crouched beside the battered metal. "This isn't from a fall," she said softly. "This kind of crush, it looks like it was forced into a confined space." Cole lifted the bottle, turning it over in his hands. "Or dragged." The volunteers exchanged uneasy glances. Dragged where? By what? And why had the mountain hidden it so deep that even professional search teams had missed it for years? He examined the inside. Empty. No sediment, no signs of animal teeth, no punctures. Just a single deep compression running diagonally across its body, as if something had pressed it hard against stone. "We need to look deeper," Cole said. He aimed his headlamp into the crevice again. The beam traveled farther now that the entrance had been widened, illuminating a narrow, descending pocket, almost like a funnel shaped by ancient shifts of granite. Beyond where the bottle had rested, the darkness thickened. "Do you see anything else?" Lucia asked. Cole hesitated, then nodded. "Something's down there, I can't tell how far." "Another piece of gear." "Maybe, but it's wedged even deeper." They attempted to reach it with a probe pole, but the crevice narrowed quickly, twisting downward at an angle too sharp for an arm or tool to maneuver. "This wasn't visible before the drought," one volunteer said. "Snowmelt must have shifted the debris." "Which means the rest of it," Lucia began, "was sealed in darkness all these years," Cole finished. They photographed the crevice, documented the angles. But without major excavation equipment, which risked destabilizing the chute, there was no safe way to access the deeper object. Cole stared into the darkness, jaw tight. "He was here," he whispered. "This proves he was here." "But where's the rest?" one volunteer murmured. The question hung in the cold air like a ghost. That night, back at the ranger station, investigators arrived to examine the bottle. One of them, a seasoned analyst who had handled dozens of wilderness disappearances, ran her thumb along the crushed metal. "This wasn't stepped on," she said. "This wasn't dropped, this was compressed. Something forced it into a smaller space." Cole leaned forward. "Could a rockslide have done that?" "Not like this," she replied. "Rockslides tear, scrape, grind. But this?" She tapped the diagonal indentation. "This looks directional." "Meaning what?" Lucia asked. The analyst shook her head slowly. "Meaning it wasn't chaotic damage. It was controlled pressure." Everyone fell silent. For the first time, the theories shifted. No longer simple accidents. No longer clean missteps. Something had acted upon the bottle. Whether human forces, geological forces, or something stranger no one in that room was willing to guess out loud. Later, as the station emptied, Cole remained alone with the evidence bag. He held the bottle again, tracing the warped metal with a trembling thumb. "You tried to get out," he whispered. "Or you were pushed in." Outside, the wind howled through the trees like something searching for an opening. And in the pit of his stomach, Cole felt the heavy certainty that the crevice still held something deeper, something the mountain wasn't ready to release. The morning after the bottle was recovered, a hush fell over the ranger station, the kind that settles when people realize they're no longer dealing with a simple disappearance. The bottle had changed everything. For 7 years, Daniel Rourke had been a ghost. Now, he was a presence, and a puzzle the mountain had only partially revealed. Mara arrived before sunrise. Cole met her outside, holding the evidence bag carefully, almost reverently. The moment she saw the crushed metal inside, her breath hitched. "That's his," she whispered, fingertips trembling as she touched the plastic. "I engraved it." The tilt of the letters. "He used it every trip." Cole nodded. "We found it deep inside a rock crevice, too deep for wind or runoff to place it there." She looked up sharply. "So he crawled in?" "We don't know," Cole replied softly. "We only know it was put there with force." Mara closed her eyes, and for a moment she swayed, as though the weight of 7 years had finally found its place to land. Then she straightened. "Did you find anything else?" Cole hesitated. "There's more, something deeper. But we can't reach it without destabilizing the entire chute." "Meaning?" "Meaning the mountain isn't ready to give it up." The word sounded ridiculous the moment they left his mouth, but Mara didn't flinch. She only stared up at the granite peaks, looming beyond the valley, a jagged crown of stone against the thinning sky. Investigators arrived throughout the day, examining the crevice, taking measurements, discussing possible geological explanations. Yet each proposed theory collapsed under its own logic. "If this was a rock slide," one specialist said, pointing at the indentation, "the bottle would show rotational scraping, not a single directional crush. If he crawled in seeking shelter," another added, "his pack or clothing should have snagged on the entry." We found nothing. By noon, the dominant theory became the one no one wanted to voice. He didn't fall in. He didn't crawl in. He was put there. That evening, just before golden hour, Cole hiked alone to the ridge, a ritual he had repeated for years, but today felt different. The air was thin, colder than usual for the season. Shadows stretched long across the basin. In the distance, thunderheads pulsed like dark veins across the far horizon. He stood at the place where he had last seen Daniel, a bright orange jacket climbing into the sky. "You didn't just vanish," Cole murmured. "Something happened. Something we missed." A breeze swept across the granite, funneling into the same bowl where the team once heard a strange, echoing call. It vibrated through the rocks, low and mournful. Cole knelt, pressing his hand to the cold stone. He imagined Daniel trapped in the dark pocket of rock, injured, wedged, waiting for help that never came. Or perhaps he had reached deeper into the crevice, searching for support, only for the mountain to shift and seal him inside. But the bottle's placement contradicted that. The angle of compression, the absence of other debris. The bottle had not tumbled. It had been driven. Cole swallowed hard. "Where are you, Daniel?" Behind him, boots crunched softly against gravel. It was Mara. "I needed to see it," she said quietly. "The place you last saw him." Cole stepped aside, letting her stand where he once watched the lone figure in orange disappear over the crest. She wrapped her arms around herself, breathing in the cold mountain air. "He loved this," she whispered. "All of this. He wouldn't have gone willingly into some hole. He wouldn't hide." "I know," Cole said. Mara turned to him. "So something happened to him that wasn't nature." Cole didn't answer. He didn't have to. As twilight deepened, the two of them stared at the ridge, a sharp silhouette against a bruised sky. Somewhere up there, within the labyrinth of stone, lay the deeper object still trapped in the crevice. Maybe a piece of equipment, maybe part of his pack, maybe something worse. Until it surfaced, the truth would remain sealed. Before they hiked down, Mara brushed her fingers along the granite, whispering, "Please let him go." But the mountain remained silent, as mountains often do, keeping its secrets in the cracks between stone, waiting for the rare season when it might release another fragment of a story it never meant to tell. And so the case of Daniel Rourke did not end with the bottle. It ended with the knowledge that somewhere, hidden deeper in the dark, the mountain still held the rest of him. A chapter unfinished. A silence unbroken. a mystery still breathing beneath the stone.